Welcome to the world famous Adventurers Club. I'm Steve Kaufman, and I'm joined tonight by Lance Miller. Let's start out by 2005 world champion of public speaking, International Toastmasters.
Yeah.
Not just that, hold on a second. We got a whole list here. Member of the Boy Scouts of America, Winged Spartans Flying Clun, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, Leadership of Waynes County,
Yeah.
member of the National Rifle Association. I'm just the things that I've been
You've done your homework.
presented with.
That's a long time ago.
Marina Sailing Club,
Yeah.
Citizens for Alternative Tax Systems, member of the Toastmasters International,
Yeah.
member of the Rotary International.
Yeah.
I have to take a breath here. Hold on
That's
a second.
okay.
National Speakers Association,
There we go.
the Way to Happiness Foundation International. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The Glendale Chamber of Commerce member, member of the Leadership of Glendale, and we would be remiss if we didn't say board member of the world famous Adventurers Club of Los Angeles, responsible for the silent auction of the Night of High Adventure.
There we go. That's the peak of my. Are we on here? No. Check that.
No. Something happened.
So we got.
You want to use my mic?
No. Press the other button. It went off. It was off. Let's just see what we got.
Hold that for a minute.
Hold on. Check. I think we're good, aren't we?
I think we're good.
Okay, good.
All right.
We're good now.
I got to be honest with you. So during the cocktail hour, during the dinner hour, there was a lot of conversation out there, just in case something happens. There's a lot of conversation out there. There's a lot of buzz right now. Everybody wants to know. They all have like this burning question. I hate to tell you. You know what they want to know?
No, I don't.
They want to know,
No, I don't.
do you validate?
Okay, so he's talking about my world champion speech, which was called The Ultimate Question.
Plague
These guys
since
have
the
one
dawn
too.
of time. And that question that each and every one of us must ask at some point in our life. Do you validate?
Just so you know what I did with that speech, I took the concept of getting your parking validated. Let's see what we're doing here.
Go ahead.
It keeps going off. I'm wondering if the batteries are going.
Go ahead.
Test. There we go. Okay, so I took the concept of getting your parking validated and talked about how easy it is to validate an individual. And that's something I've lived in my life and had dealt with at some significant portions of my life with some very subtle but powerful invalidation on a continuous basis where you're sort of constantly being told you're not quite living up to what we expect of you. And the effect that has on your psyche is really pretty dramatic. And wound up building one of the largest Toastmasters clubs in the world by simply validating its membership and telling people how great they were doing. And I learned to do that in management, changed my career, build a lot of businesses off of really bringing out the best in people.
Yeah, so once they gave me this opportunity to interview Lance, I did a deep dive on Lance Miller. I never thought I'd do a deep dive on Lance Miller's background. And as best I can tell, your passion for adventure started a few years ago when you were 14 years old.
Yeah, just a couple years ago, exactly.
Yeah. So after comparing notes this afternoon, we aren't just interested in telling fishing stories. You'd like folks to understand and walk away with some messages tonight. Let's start with what you would call your biggest regret.
Yeah, my biggest regret came, I was about 24. And when I was 20, I'd had the opportunity to sail across the Atlantic, had a great time, which we're going to get into that trip a little bit later. But the folks that I'd sailed with were very impressed with my ability to, basically handle the ship, navigate, and handle the environment of being on a ship. And they were getting ready to circumnavigate the world. They wrote me a letter. I was working for my family. We had a milk and ice cream business in Indiana. I was out of college a couple years. And they wanted me to be first mate on their boat, on their ship, and go around the world. And it was a paid trip, because I was going to be one of the working crew members. So I had a 2-year trip around the world. And I wrote them back and said, no, I really need to stay in Indiana and drive milk trucks. And at the time, it seemed like the responsible, logical response I should give. I was out of school. I was trying to keep my family business going. I needed to dedicate myself to that. And I have to tell you, that is sort of a hallmark for my life. And that is the challenge between doing what you want to do and doing what you're supposed to do. And I think I'm hoping I'm not the only one that's been challenged with that in their life. But there's this expectation from family, from society, from friends on what you're supposed to do. And you have this thing you want to do, and they don't always align. And in my life, that was pretty significant.
So tell us about the Telluride mountaineering school that you went to.
Yeah, so I was living in a small town in Indiana. I talked to my parents. I'm 13, and I'd seen something on TV, and I said, I want to go to the survival school in Colorado. And fortunately, they said, okay, and we went to the library and looked up places in Colorado, and the thing we found was the Telluride Mountaineering School. Wrote them a letter. I wound up spending 6 weeks in Colorado at the age of 14, learning to climb, read topo maps, rafted the Green River, did a 10-day hike through the Rockies by myself. And, it was interesting. There were a lot of things I learned at that point. One was I was put in an environment that totally challenged what I considered to be my normal. And I realized that what I was capable of was a lot more than I ever thought I was capable of. Another thing, when we went on the Green River, we're in a canyon, and we get down there, and there's 30 kids in this camp, in this school, and we get in there, and they said, oh my God, we forgot half the food. Now, when you're 14 years old, the last thing you want to know is there's not enough food. Now, just so you know, there's plenty of food. We got one serving, though. We got one serving every meal. That was all we got. And I sat in that frickin' boat floating down the Green River, just dreaming of eating. When I got out of this canyon for 6 days, I was just dreaming of the ice cream sundaes I was going to make back when I got home. And all I thought of was trying to get enough food. And they threw us in the back. This is back in the 70s. So they threw us in the back of about a 5-ton cattle truck with some stake bed siding on it. We'd go whipping down the road in Utah, and we stop at this little gas station, and they've got a little window for food. And the 30 kids jump out of this truck, and they have foot-long hot dogs. And this guy, I swear, he must have hit them over motherload, because everybody's ordering like several foot-long hot dogs. By the time I got up there, I could only order 2, because that's like all we had left. I ate 1.5 foot-long hot dogs, and I wasn't hungry anymore. And I went, this whole week, all I could think about was eating, because I was told there wasn't enough food. And it was really a cool thing. I actually handled any issue I had with eating and hunger. And I would be with people, and they're like, oh, I got to eat. I'm going, you know what? As soon as you eat, you're not hungry anymore. It's not a problem. But there are people that actually freak out if they don't have enough food. The other thing that I learned was the director of the school had something he said, your decisions come down many times to what he called the concessions of comfort. You're trying to make a decision on being comfortable, and that is your downfall. And he gives the example of you come to a stream, you're hiking, and he goes, you want to be comfortable, you don't want to take the time to take your boots off, so you walk through the stream with your socks on, and you get your socks and your boots wet. Now your socks and your boots are wet, and you wind up getting blisters. He goes, the other thing is you have this idea you want to be comfortable, you don't want your socks and boots wet, so you take your boots and socks off and walk across the stream barefoot and you cut your feet. He says the right thing to do is to take your boots and socks off, put your boots back on, walk across the stream, pour the water out of your boots, put your socks back on, and he goes, you walk the water out of your boots in 4 or 5 minutes. That's the right decision. The other two are wrong because you're pushing comfort, and I really learned to look at comfort as being a sort of an antithesis to proper decisions, and so many people base their decisions based on their comfort level, and that winds up being the wrong decision. And that's paid huge dividends for my entire life. The last thing I want to tell you, this was in 1972. I was 14 years old, and he said the best book he ever read, I remember this. He goes, the best book I ever read was a book called Endurance. That's all I remembered. That is all I remembered. And in 1994, I went to the library and checked out Endurance and read it, and that book changed my life. All I could remember was Dave Farney said the best book he'd ever read was Endurance. I remembered that for, 22 years, and went and checked the book out. And that's another story we'll talk about, but that's, of course, Ernest Shackleton's surviving his trip in Antarctica in 1914.
Wow.
And then, a couple other things along that line. I had a lot of flying in my family. My grandfather bought a plane from a barnstormer in 1928. The guy came to town, and there weren't many people flying it, so he said, take me for a ride. He bought the rest of the day. He said, told me, teach me to fly it, and at the end of the day, he bought the plane from him. I had an uncle who was a Navy pilot. I had another uncle who was one of the senior test pilots at Edwards with Chuck Yeager. He and Chuck Yeager were buddies. But my dad never learned to fly. And this gets back into that whole component of doing what you want to do and what you're supposed to do. My dad had resistance because his brother and his father flew, but he never did. So he considered himself, if I went out and flew, it was going to make him wrong in something. But when I was 19, I got my pilot's license. And that experience getting my pilot's license changed my life from a number of standpoints. One, I realized I was able and I could learn things. And school was not, I was a decent student in school, but that's not where I thrived. But to learn to fly an airplane and navigate it properly and understand weather and avionics and radios and all the things you have to do, the whole communication systems and that you have to do, it gave me a huge boost in confidence that I could learn anything. And it also gave me the concept of planning stuff from the beginning all the way through the end, and realizing when I planned things, I needed to take that cycle completely to the end, and that is something I carried with me my entire life. And so, from that standpoint, yes, I had this situation where we're going to get into it in a second here. You got a picture of me at 19 years old with my Cherokee 140 there when I was getting my pilot's license. I flew home. My dad took that. That's when I had a full head of hair. So on that. But I grew up, we had a summer home in northern Michigan, and I grew up sailing a lot. And a fraternity brother of mine in college, we were talking about trying to go down to the Caribbean and sail on a large boat over spring break. And he brings the state newspaper into me, and there's a little classified ad that said, summer of 1978, transatlantic sailing program from St. Thomas to Stavanger, Norway. Call this number. And this is one of the things I learned. I just picked up the phone and called it immediately. It's a guy named Cliff Borges. I remember it. And he goes, okay, let's meet this bar. So we met down at a bar in East Lansing. Sat down and talked to him, and he said he'd run a summer camp in northern Michigan, wanted to put a transatlantic sailing program together, found a guy in the Caribbean that would do it, and I said, I want to get in on it. And he goes, okay. That trip was sold out in 3 days. There were only 9 spaces. And I called immediately, got in immediately, and it was one of those things, too, when you look at where are the breaks in your life, the fact that I acted immediately and I didn't hesitate and, called my mom and dad and said, oh, I'm thinking about calling this guy and let me check him out. The trip I would have missed the opportunity to do that. So the summer of 78, I wound up getting on, this is the Queen of Sheba, an 84-foot staysail schooner, and I sailed, Phoebe's the next slide, I sailed from the Virgin Islands, the Bermuda, Azores, Southern Ireland, up through Scotland, across 2 canals, and then into Norway. It was an incredible summer. We did everything, ran the ship ourselves, did everything on it, from celestial navigation to cooking meals along the way there. And, again, Steve, one of the things, this photo right here, this was a life-changing event. We were going from Bermuda to the Azores. And there's something called the Azorean High, and that's not something you smoke. That's a high-pressure system that sits in the middle of the ocean, and we had no wind. We were stuck in the Azorean High, and as you can see, the water is completely flat. And it was a 13-day trip over to the Azores. Now, fortunately, we had a ton of fuel on board, and we're motoring. And when we motored, we had an autopilot. We could just set the heading and click a button, and the boat would stay on that heading. It didn't have it when we sailed, but when we motored, we could do that. We actually stuffed a dummy and put it behind the wheel because we never touched the wheel for 5 or 6 days. And we were running all of our watches, and we're just motoring along, and the ocean's flat, and we're just running on automatic. And the captain has us sanding some stuff down and refinishing things, but we're just going along. We stop every day, go for a swim, and we just fire the engine back, we crank the engine back up. We're going along, and we're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and all of a sudden somebody goes, oh my gosh, look at that. And there's a freighter. Now that looks like it's fairly far away. It's about 3/8 of a mile away. We never saw it until it was a beam, because we were running on automatic. And that experience changed my life, because one of the things that can happen in life is you can get really comfortable running on automatic and you're not watching the horizon. And some examples I saw with that, a great example is Uber. There's taxi companies all across America that were just running on automatic. They're the taxi company. And they're not looking at the horizon of changing technologies. And all of a sudden, just with that, in New York, I think it was $250,000 it took to get a taxi medallion to put in the hood of your taxi to have a taxi business. All of a sudden, if you got a car and a cell phone, you can be a taxi. And the taxi companies just got knocked on their can with Uber. And quite honestly, Uber was a lot nicer. There's taxis, they were dirty, they were stinky. When you didn't know if it was showing up for you or not, you had no idea. There were all sorts of problems with it. If they were watching the horizon and the technologies coming up, they could have created those apps. But they were running on automatic. And that was a lesson, again, that through my adventure activity, and that's one of the things I wanted to learn with adventures was, to me, there's like universal laws. And one of the things that irritated me was when I would be working with someone and I had somebody's opinion I had to deal with. There's universal laws, and in adventures I got to learn universal laws. And that was one of the ones that I got to learn in the middle of the Atlantic. So I don't want to talk all the time. You can ask me questions.
No. So I'm going to switch mics with you because you're talking more than I am.
Okay.
And I think it's only fair. But while we're doing this, let's talk about your ice dive.
Okay.
I think that's the most important thing.
Okay.
And in the middle of that, I'm going to take this off, and I'll switch with you.
Rich says don't take the mic off.
Oh.
Okay. So yeah, before I went on the sailing trip, I got my scuba certification, and I'm sitting in Indiana. It's February, I think, 1984, and a buddy of mine calls, and he goes, "Hey, Lance, my scuba club's doing an ice dive at a gravel pit in Ohio. Do you want to go?" And without hesitation, I go, "Yeah." Now, here was the thing. I looked at that, and I went out and did an ice dive. Now, here's how crazy it was. I had a wetsuit. I didn't have a dry suit. I had a wetsuit, and I jumped. I had a triangle cut in the ice, and I jumped in the ice, and for the first and only time in my life, I hyperventilated. And I had all these ropes tied around me, and I had all the gear on me and stuff. And I remember the dive master looked at me, and he said, put the regulator in your mouth. I said, okay. He goes, put your face in the water. You're going to get as much air out of that regulator as you do out of the air. And I put the regulator in my mouth, and I put my face in the water and started breathing and just calmed down. And I pride myself on usually not being out of control, but that was one of the times that it was just a real shock with everything I had going on. And then went down and, burned a tank of air swimming under the ice in a gravel pit in Ohio. But as I look back on that decision, I go, if somebody called and they said, hey, we're going to a chamber music concert on Saturday. Do you want to come? I probably would have thought about it a little bit. But they go, we're going to do an ice dive. Yeah, I want to do that. And I realized as I look back on my life, I really had a desire to push myself as far as I could outside my comfort zone. Because every time I got outside of my own comfort zone, I learned something about myself, that I learned something how I was more able. I had a better ability to handle the day-to-day living because I'd expanded that comfort zone. And that was a real drive I had, at those points.
Yeah. We talked about this earlier. I think all of us, when we're younger, we feel, indestructible, like nothing can happen to us. And the older we get, we're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that, like, challenging thing.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the other thing is like, this piece of meat that I'm running around called me, it isn't quite as resilient as it used to be.
Right. Right.
And, there's things I go, yeah, there was a time I would have done that.
Right.
But right now, this thing is not a 28-year-old body anymore.
Right.
But also I would just say one of the things I learned through that is that I'm not this. And that's a huge, my energy, my life energy, my identity is not tied to, the blood corpuscling through my veins and stuff. Yeah, this thing's alive, but, my energy and attitudes toward life aren't based on, this piece of meat I'm walking around.
Right, right. I think we have a bunch more
photos. This was in St. Lucia. Every time I go someplace I can dive, I just will take a dive. That was in St. Lucia. I had another one at the Red Sea. I had another one at the Great Barrier Reef I was at. That one is in the Cayman Islands. Here was the funny thing in the Cayman Islands. I'm diving, and I said, well, do I need a wetsuit? And they go, no, the water's about 80 degrees. I said, yeah, but what about the thermal? The girl looks at me and she goes, what thermal? I went down to 115 feet and it was still 80 degrees. And I could also read a newspaper down there. It was just as clear as it was at the surface.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah, so that is the Red Sea. And that, again, what I've done, in a lot of the places, because when I won the World Championship of Public Speaking, I started getting invited around the world to go speak. And I would talk to people about, what can I do when I'm visiting their country? And I was in Jeddah, and the gentleman I was with, he had read something about I scuba dived. Somebody in his office was a scuba instructor, so he gave the guy the day off to take me diving in the Red Sea. And a lot of these things that I've done, which has been great for me, it's because I'm hosted. They host the trip and they host the whole thing, so it was like, nothing out of my pocket, and I got to go have these experiences.
Yeah. I think we have some more.
That's the Barrier Reef. And you don't, and the unfortunate thing that year was they just had a cyclone come in, so there was still a lot of cloudiness and the reefs were covered up. That's the same thing as a hurricane on it. But, the thing you got to love about Australia is they've got about 15 things that'll kill you there. And the box jelly is one of them that'll kill you, and jellyfish, and it's got tentacles that'll fall off it that are about 6 feet long. I saw 2 box jellies diving, that was the fun part.
Wow. And then you remember, there was this movie like back in the 1980s called Ferris Bueller.
Oh, yeah.
What was that phrase that Ferris Bueller said?
He goes, life moves pretty fast, and if what is it? I don't know. If you don't stop and enjoy it, you're going to miss it.
If you don't smell the roses, right?
Smell the roses, right?
If you don't smell the roses, you're going to miss it, right?
Yeah.
And so talk about these next set of photos and how they relate to smelling the roses and experiencing life like in its totality.
Well, you know, one of the things, like I said, I had an opportunity to travel a lot, and that was something I was very interested in. And when I would travel, it's easy to just to say I stayed in my hotel and I went to the conference and I spoke, but I would always talk to people about, can I get out someplace? And we talk about, with the Adventures Club, about getting off the beaten path. And sometimes off the beaten path is not, like, it's not 10 days out. Sometimes it's 30 minutes or 15 minutes. And in this case, I was down in Wollongong, Australia, which is about 2 hours south of Sydney. And we were coming back, and I'm talking to the guy driving me, and I said, you know, we're talking about different aspects of life. And he goes, oh, mate, let me show you this. And he takes a right, and he goes flying off the road, and we go to this cliff looking at the coast. And it was an incredible view of the whole eastern coast of Australia, and it was off the beaten path. You know, I mean, I would have never seen that. We could have just stayed in the car, driven back to Sydney. But no, he takes me off, and I just said, gorgeous view down the coast. That picture doesn't really do it justice, but, you know, you get an idea of it. But I've done that time and time again when I travel, is try to get off the beaten path. This is in China, and the thing in China, I had a group. These three people took me up the coast, and we stop at a seafood restaurant. Now, the interesting thing in the seafood restaurant in China is you want to make sure you know what you're getting. And so you literally, those are aquariums there, and they got fish in them, and you point to the fish you want. You have to pick your live fish. And they explained to me later, if you go to a restaurant and you don't pick your fish, you don't know what you're getting. And that fish might have been there for 3 or 4 days. You don't know what you're getting. You pick your fish, they pull it out, and that's the fish you're getting, you know, from that standpoint. And so from that standpoint, it was a little bit off the beaten path that I was used to. What's the next slide, Phoebe? Okay, this was in Bahrain. This is the first oil well in the Middle East. Okay, and there's an interesting story about it. Standard Oil came in to drill, and this is back in the 20s. And they were drilling, and they hadn't hit anything yet. And they were going to pull their rig and go home. And there was a foreman with Bahrainian Bahrainian Petroleum, who said, oh, that's okay, we're going to continue to drill after you leave. And he had no authority to say that. And because of that, Standard Oil stayed and drilled for another week. And about 5 days later, they hit this huge oil deposit. Okay? And that is we know how much oil is in the Middle East. That's the first oil well drilled in the Middle East. And that is way out in the middle of the desert in South Bahrain. And you wouldn't get that going to Bahrain. But I was in a car, and I said, hey, what can you show me around your island? And they took me out to that. And then what's the next photo? I think that's the minister. Yeah. I met with the Minister of Interior, and that's a little bit off the beaten path. And so I'm right at the corner there, as you can see me. But to meet the top officials in the country is not something that I would consider a normal activity that you have going on. And again, just being prepared for the unexpected. You know, but they'd set that up. The Minister of Interior came in. And then the next photo on this is the oldest tree in Bahrain. That tree is 800 years old. And here's the amazing thing. It's sitting out in the middle of the desert, nothing around it except a road. And they actually people have gone and they were cutting branches off of it and drilling holes in it, trying to like get the life energy it had or something. They were killing the trees, so they had to put all this stuff around and say, don't do that. But I would have never experienced going to an 800-year-old tree in Bahrain if I hadn't gotten off the beaten path and being willing to, you know, ride 2 hours south in a Jeep and, you know, on a dusty road.
Yeah, I think there's a couple more here for the Ferris Bueller.
Well, that's the Spanish River up in Canada. I went on a canoe trip for 5 days up there. They had it was a humanitarian effort. I was up there. They had a big food shortage for the mosquitoes, and I went up and I fed the mosquitoes for about a week. So, yeah.
You personally fed mosquitoes?
I fed mosquitoes for about a week up there. This is in El Salvador, and again, I've been able to combine a lot of my work with sort of adventure activities. This isn't a plant that burns tires for energy way back in the mountains of El Salvador. And you talk about being off the beaten path. We were definitely off the beaten path when I was back in there touring that plant. And we were in a government van for like 2.5 hours north of San Salvador to get out to where this plant was. And that was back when El Salvador was not as nice as it is today. So what's the next thing I got? Oh, this one was fun. This is on the Gold Coast of Australia. And this is a macadamia nut farm. And a gentleman who was hosting me owned a macadamia nut farm. And his house is on the left, and there's another house on the right next to that tall tree, which is their guest house. And I get to stay in the guest house. But you needed a four-wheel drive to get out there. So we went rolling through these hills in the outback of Australia. And I think the next one should be me with the dog. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. And so I get to stay in this great place. I'm having a cigar and a beer, reading my book, and their dog's visiting me. And, you know, it's going, this isn't bad. You know, I think I can deal with this. But this is a place you would never find just going to Australia and going on some trip. Let's see what the next thing we got here is.
All right. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, this is in India. It was funny. I was going to India on a speaking gig, and they said, "Have you ever been to India?" And I said, "No." "Would you like to see some sights?" I said, "Sure." Now, normally what that means is some of the people at the conference will pick you up and take you around. Okay, so I spoke on Saturday and Sunday, and on Monday morning I woke up and I called the director, and I said, "What am I supposed to do?" And they said, "Oh, the car will pick you up at 10 o'clock. What am I doing? They said, "Well, just leave your bags, but take enough for 5 days." I had a 5-day tour through India with a driver, my own driver, and I went to the Taj Mahal. I went to all these historical sites. I went to the Tiger Preserve. But the driver on the way back said, "Would you like to meet my family?" And I went into the housing projects, or the housing areas, the apartment areas in Delhi, and we were up on like the 6th floor in this little apartment, and his wife fixed me a dinner. And I'm sitting on the bed with his wife, his kids, his mother's in the background there. Now, the reason he did it, he wanted a bigger tip, quite honestly. But it was such a cool experience to actually meet the family of the guy that had driven me around for 5 days around India. And I was glad to give him the tip and sort of see where he lived, and the food was delicious, and it was again just a great experience.
Awesome.
And this was in India also. This was outside a tiger preserve, and there was a gentleman that we went in this jeep to. I never saw the tigers, but my driver was telling the guide that I'm this world famous international speaker. So he said he teaches a physics class in an Indian high school at night. Would I come talk to his class? And so that's his class with me sitting in the middle of it. And I went in, and I'm trying to think, yeah, what can I say to him? So I gave him, I think, I don't remember what the talk was about, but I came up with something of value to him. But that was actually the high point of that whole trip, was actually sitting, meeting the kids, and getting a chance to sit in that class with them and maybe have some influence or direction on their experience in life. So yeah, we're talking about, this was in Japan. Again, I'm driving back from a conference with a lady in the car, and we're talking about things. And I don't remember exactly what we're talking about, but I was talking about seeing the real Japan. All of a sudden she stops and she turns, and we drive about 30 minutes off this road, just down these little roads. I have no idea where we're going, and we come to this giant Buddha out in the middle of nowhere. And again, it was one of those things, I would have never seen it, never experienced it, if I wasn't pushing for getting off the beaten path. And that's again in India. That's down in Kochi, India, which is where all the seasonings are and the spices come from. I'm sitting in the hotel, and I go, "Can you take me out and show me around?" And they take me down to the river and introduce me to some of the fishermen that fish on the shore of the river. And I don't know that I want to eat the fish that came out of that river, but I got to see the real India in the process of that. So now I got to tell you this one just for a minute. This is Monument Valley, and I was on a motorcycle ride. I drove a motorcycle about 10 years. And I'm going out to Dove Creek, which is a little town in southwestern Colorado, and I have some friends that have an earth-sheltered, off-the-grid home there. And we're right at the south end of Monument Valley. We have a double rainbow that's going there, and I've got a buddy I ride with on his bike. And we take off and start heading north, and we wound up riding through this huge rainstorm that washed out 2 bridges in Boulder. It was all over the news. But I was about 2 hours, and as you can see, there's no shoulder there. So it's not like you can pull over. I was in line, and I had a wake coming off my front wheel. And fortunately, I had a good rain suit, but I felt like I was scuba diving with a motorcycle. And my bike started to short out because all this wiring was getting wet. When I pulled my clutch in, the lights would turn off and stuff. And anyway, made it out of that. But that was an experience worth living through. You know.
Probably equal to what our members are going through in Burning Man.
Burning
right
Man,
now.
yeah, exactly. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what they have.
One more.
So, one more. This is the earth-sheltered home in Dove Creek, and we live in such a crazy world out here in LA, and I drove out there and saw them, and I go, why would you want to live out here? And I got up the next morning and walked out, and I could see about 70 miles in every direction, and it was totally quiet and no electronic noise going on or anything like that. And I sat there and I went, I can see why you'd want to live out here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in the middle of my sailing trip. I'm not sure what happened to that.
It's coming.
Okay.
Next slide.
Okay, so we had that one, and let's go to the next one, Phoebe. So this is the Azores, and this is in Horta, the island of Fayal, the city of Horta, which is the westernmost island in the Azores. I'm the tall blonde on the left, in case you were wondering. That's when I had a full head of hair. And we had just painted on the wall the sign of the Queen of Sheba, which is the name of our boat, which is that crown. And there's there's this huge, breakwater wall, and all the boats that come in, they say it's bad luck if you don't paint your name on the wall. So we painted our name on the wall. I had a couple things that happened in the Azores that were very transformative to me. And first of all, the Azores were like going back 100 years in time. They were still milking cows on the side of the road. They were bringing hay into town in the back of donkeys. A beer was 18 cents. It was just, you felt like you just stepped back in time 50 or 60, 70 years. Incredible experience. We sailed from Fayal over to San Miguel, which is the main island in the Azores, anchored there. And there's a hot springs up in the mountains across the island. And so one of the guys on the boat and I decided to hitchhike over to the hot springs. And there's about 10 miles of flat plain on the western side of San Miguel, and then it starts to go up in the mountains. So as we're hitchhiking, it's really interesting, people would wave to you and say, no, I can't pick you up. And there was this guy in a little tiny Toyota pickup truck. He had his wife and 2 kids in the front seat and had a stake bed on the back. And every 2 miles there was a town, so we'd catch a ride, and he came through, and I'm hitchhiking, and he waves, and I wave back, and he goes on. This happened 3 times in a row. And finally, he comes in the town. He's coming. What happens? I get a ride to the next town. He'd stopped in the next town. I walk through the town, hitchhiking, looking for another ride. He drives through, and then we go to the next town. We get there. He comes by. And so at the 4th town, right before we go up in the mountains, I look at him. I start smiling and just laughing. And he stops, and he goes, hop in the back. Now, it's a little tiny Toyota pickup truck with a stake bed on the back. So my buddy and I hop in the back, and we're sitting. The cab's here. We're sitting facing each other. And this guy starts to drive up in the mountains, and he's driving like a bat out of hell. This car is going crazy. He's passing people on curves. There's no way he can see if anybody's coming. And I'm looking over the edge, and there's like 200-300-foot drop-offs, and the wheels like sliding on the side of the road. Now, at this point in my life, all the training I've had from my family is, my dad had this thing he would always say to me, you're rapidly becoming the person you hope to be. The decisions you make today, you're going to carry with you the rest of your life. And I had this huge burden of making the right decisions so I'd have the right future in my life. And I'm sitting there flying up these mountains in the Azores going, oh, I got in a car with a stranger and I don't know who he is and I made a bad decision and I'm going to die in the Azores. And I go, I shouldn't have done this. And all this other consideration is sitting on me that I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to make other people happy with it. Meanwhile, my buddy Ray is, every time this truck hits a bump, there's a toolbox right here, it bounces up, and it goes kaboom, and Ray goes, yahoo! And the guy looks back and he gives him a thumbs up and he starts driving faster. And I go, what are you doing? He's going to kill us. As we worked into this thing, I finally looked at it and I said, if I'm going to die, I want to die careening off a cliff in the Azores. I don't want to die sitting at a desk someplace. This is exactly where I want to die. I want people to go, he was on a trip across the Atlantic, he was hitchhiking across San Miguel, and he flew off a frickin' cliff in the Azores and he lost it. And I started going, woohoo! Woohoo! And here's what happened. I got to tell you, that life experience of blowing through that zone of trying to do everything right and willing to accept whatever came and willing to die for it, I never felt alive in my life until I was willing to die for what I was doing. And as it turned out, as you know, I got all my fingers and toes that I didn't die. We made it through. But there were a few moments there. Anyway, but that was a transformative period for me. And it was that whole trip was amazing because I was on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic going to foreign countries. And I started to separate out this incredible experience, this incredible influence that our families and society have on us, and how much of my thinking was embedded in other people other than myself. And I started to get all of a sudden I'm looking going, it's sort of like what's me and what's Memorex? What am I being told I'm supposed to do versus what do I really believe I should do? And that was the first time I really started to experience and separate those points out. So on that. I've got another actually interesting. This is Ireland. We went up in southwestern Ireland. That's the Queen sitting out there. Then we went up to the Irish Sea. We went into Campbellton. And there's a funny thing that happened. We came into Campbellton, Scotland. A couple of funny stories in Campbellton, Scotland. We came flying in under 5 sails, beautiful sunset. We sailed right up into the front of the bay where everybody could see us, dropped our sails on the deck, and it was like we were finally coming together as a crew, and it was sort of like, look at us! We're cool. Okay? And so we anchored, and the next day, we're pretty north, so there's a lot of tidal drift. There's an 8-foot tide in Campbellton. The boat swung around in 12 feet of water. Okay? And we drew 8 feet. Phoebe, show the next slide. And so there's our boat in Campbellton, Scotland, that as the tide went out, we became the laughing stock of the city. And so it's like we're sitting there, okay, now we're aground in the shallow part, and I actually have pictures of me standing there with my hand on the deck and a few things like that, and stuff. And so the boat floats back up at about midnight. We go anchor it. What happened when we anchored was that the fishing trawlers would come drop their cables in the bay. We anchored into a bunch of cables, and we got about a force 5 gale that blew in the next day. And we started to drag our anchor. We're an 84-foot sailboat. That's a 22-foot sailboat. It was moored. We're anchored. We're dragging our anchor, and we're blowing over the top of this 22-foot sailboat. It's got a bow pulpit on the front of it. It had bent the bow pulpit clear on the deck. It was getting ready to go under us. We were going to sink it. I jumped down on the deck, somebody throws me a knife. I cut the bow lines off of it. I'm on the stern of that right now. They threw me a line. We motored across the bay. That boat belonged to the top customs official in Scotland who'd sailed down the weekend before and moored his boat to sail it back the next day. And we had severely damaged that boat. So here we are. Here's another great life lesson. It's real easy to get your ears pinned back when you come in acting like you're the hottest thing in town. And we sailed into Campbellton, the hottest thing in town. Had 2 major incidents with going aground, floating over the top customs official's boat. The other funny thing that happened, one of the girls on the boat was hitchhiking out in the country. She got picked up by these 4 guys, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we're with a band called Wings." No. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, we were just at Paul McCartney's house working on the next album." She goes, "Yeah, right." And they bring her into town, and she goes into this bar, and she's playing pool with them. And they're talking, and she's like, "You guys are full of crap. There's no way you're Wings." And they go, "We got to go." They walk out of the bar, and all these people in the bar came running over to him going, "Oh, my God, how do you know them?" She goes, "That was Wings? That was really Wings." So, yeah, Paul, that's when the whole question of Paul is dead, he had a compound outside of Campbellton, Scotland, is where he was. So anyway, what happens is we wind up sneak out of Campbellton, and we're heading north, and we're feeling, tails a little bit between our legs. We made a mess out of Campbellton, and we're sailing up this lock, and the water's completely calm. We're tacking back and forth. It's right at sunset. And all of a sudden we hear this bagpipe playing. We're listening where it is. It's about 2 miles across this lock. Binoculars are looking. We see a guy standing on the stoop of his house playing a bagpipe to us. And then he goes in the house, and we went, "Oh, okay." And then about 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, one of the guys goes, "Captain, there's a boat approaching." So this long boat approaches. There's 4 men in it. One of them's the guy with the bagpipe. They pull up alongside, climb on board. 3 of them were history professors, and they went back to the helm and took the helm away from the guy at the helm. They knew all the eddies and backwaters in this area, so they kept us in the eddies and the backwaters and started telling us the history of the Scottish clans that fought the hills. The bagpipist went to the bow and started playing his bagpipe.
Do we have that slide?
Yeah, this is the next slide up. And this is a world-famous bagpipist. The pipes are 400 years old. He's got multiple albums. To this day, I do not know who he is, okay? But he played for like 40 minutes as we sailed up the lock. And we sailed up right to the edge of Crinan Canal. They got in their boat. It was night. They went back home. But what an incredible experience of humanity to like come out and join us and take us up the lock. You can see how calm the water is. We're sailing in that water.
Yeah. It
is like glass. And so keeping us in the eddies and stuff. Cars along the side of the highway were stopping and watching us come up. It was just an incredible thing. And then we went through the Crinan Canal, which we were within 1 foot of being too long to go through the Crinan Canal because of the locks. But the next slide is showing us going through the mountains of Scotland in our 84-foot sailboat down along the Crinan Canal. And then the next one, we came out of that and went over to the Caledonian Canal, and that's a big canal that goes across Scotland. And those are the series of locks we have to get up to get to Loch Lochy, which is the first lock we sailed through. And we sailed through Loch Lochy, and the next lock is a famous lock. It's called Loch Ness. And this is us sailing in Loch Ness. I'd gone out in the dinghy and gone way ahead, and then this big wind came up. We put up the square sail, and we started shooting down the loch. But we sailed we stopped at a castle that I'm trying to remember the name of it. It is Urgarkart Castle, I think.
Is that it right there?
Yeah, that's it right there. Now that's a famous castle because in National Geographic there's a picture of the Loch Ness Monster right off that castle. And this is another one of these transformative moments in life because as a kid, I used to dig through National Geographic. I love National Geographic. You know, for a couple of reasons. One of them was, yes, all the naked Native women. But I just love the components of adventure. And there were, in the back of my mind, there was a desire to be a photographer for National Geographic. I just didn't know how to achieve that. And I had this whole pressure to be in the dairy business that I didn't want to be in. But I'm sitting there and I'm going, you see the peak right in the middle there. I climbed up on that peak that night and sat up there and looked up and down Loch Ness and couldn't believe I was sitting in a place that I considered to be beyond me, because it was a place in a National Geographic magazine that I thought I would never venture to. It might as well have been on Mars. And the fact that I was there looking at it was just, was just transformative to me. And the cool part was it was in late July, so it was twilight till 11 o'clock at night that night. Excuse me. And then we shot on across the North Sea. There I am, with my full beard and everything, and another full head of hair across the North Sea. And we wound up in Stavanger, Norway, which is the next shot. And, it was an 8-week trip that summer that was just spectacular, life-changing for me. I got off, I hitchhiked to Norway for a couple weeks and went home and realized I didn't want to be there. But I was trying to do the right thing, what I was supposed to do, so I finished my next 2 years of college. So I'm not sure where we're going from here.
Well, we're going to go for a couple like aha moments.
Okay.
Where we met some of our lifelong friends, right?
This is in Singapore. And again, we talk about being off the beaten path. This guy named Kit Pappas was a fraternity brother of mine. And when Kit got out of school, he was in the hotel business. And he was an intern with Westin. And he opened a Westin in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I lived about an hour and a half from Cincinnati. And so Kit and I would get together all the time, and we became actually better friends out of college than we were in college. And he wound up doing phenomenally well in the hotel business. This is in Singapore. And, gosh, when was this? It had to be 17, 18, something like that. He goes, 2017 or 18. He calls me in October, and he goes, hey, do you ever go to Singapore? And I go, yeah, I'm supposed to go there in May. He goes, well, we got a hotel there. When you go there, I want you to stay in our hotel. It winds up being the top property in Singapore. It's an old British officers' quarters, and it's where Trump and Kim Jong-un stayed when they had their meeting in Singapore. It is the most exclusive property in all of Singapore. And then about a week before I'm going, Kit calls me and he goes, hey, when are you going to Singapore? I go, next Thursday. He goes, you're kidding. He goes, what time are you arriving? I said, about 5 in the morning. He goes, I get in at 1. And so he was getting in at 1 o'clock. And this is Kit and I smoking my last two Cohiba 6s, or Siglo 6s, my Cuban cigars, at the most exclusive resort in Singapore. And I never thought our paths would have crossed halfway around the world with the paths that that we were walking. But there we were, having a great time in Singapore.
40 years later.
40 years later. You never know where these things are going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what else I got. Oh, this one was, this is Sydney, Australia. You can see the Opera House off to the left, off my right shoulder there. And that's the top of the Harbor Bridge. And this is a great friend of mine, Phil Bendai, and I'm down there for a conference, and Phil goes, what do you want to do tonight? You want to go to a museum? You want to, I go, museum? No. He goes, you want to climb to the top of Harbor Bridge? And I go, yeah. And again, it was like an ice dive. It was like, you want to climb? Yeah, I want to climb to the top of Harbor Bridge. He goes, okay. So he gets the last tour that goes up. So we go up. It's actually daylight. But as we go up, the sun's setting. I watched the sunset over Sydney, the top of the Harbor Bridge. The lights come up. We get that photo taken. And of course, that wasn't free of charge. And, and they don't let you take anything up. We have to wear their suits. This isn't off the beaten path from the standpoint that you're doing it on your own, but it's off the beaten path, and it's something most people don't really do. But again, just an incredible experience to be at the top of the Harbor Bridge and look at Sydney at night is not an experience a lot of people actually have an opportunity to do. Right. And again, I would just say it's something that I've been fortunate to always say yes on those things.
Yeah.
So let me talk about this for a second. We're going to culminate with this. This is where a lot of stuff really came together for me. A lot of my life, I had this conflict going on between trying to earn a living and do the adventures I wanted to do. And in 1998, someone called me and said, we want to interview you for something. I said, okay. And somebody had known what my past was. And what had happened, and we didn't get a lot of publicity on this in Europe, but there were a series of laws being passed in France, Belgium, Germany, and some Eastern European countries that were targeted to outlaw, may actually make criminal 180 religions. And there were a group of religions here in the U.S. that formed something called the International Foundation for Human Rights and Tolerance that were promoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all these countries had signed. They didn't have a Bill of Rights, but they had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so I went into this meeting. They said, we want to run a 2,000-mile marathon across Europe through 8 countries promoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We want you to lead it. And I said, I can't take 3 months off and do that. And I had something said to me I'd never had said to me before. They said, Lance, this will happen without you, but we don't have anybody with your qualifications. There had always been lots of people with my qualifications way ahead of me and everything I'd done. And I started to look at it. I had this crazy compilation of, I had all this leadership skill I'd done in running businesses. I had actually was PR trained and had debated federal tax policy for 3 years, did 100 radio shows on that. So I was PR trained on how to speak. I had a robust speaking business at that point. And I'd hitchhiked across Europe a couple times on the $5 a day drinking tour budget. You know, that's where you stay in the youth hostels and you find the 2 Aussies every night and go out drinking. And so I knew how to get around Europe with, back then it was a fedoras and on nothing.
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
did the Aussies buy your drinks?
Did the what?
Did the Aussies buy your drinks?
No, the Aussies did not buy my drinks,
Oh,
okay?
okay.
But no, I just was looking for someone to go out and have a good time. They always leave in twos. You can always find them. They always leave in twos. So I sat down and I looked at it, and again, I'm going to go back to the whole thing you started with. They said, I had this regret that I didn't get on that boat and sail around the world, and that ate at me, that I'd missed an opportunity. And I looked at this and I said, I don't want to look back on my life, realize I had an opportunity to run a 2,000-mile marathon across Europe, and I didn't do it because I needed to stay home and pay my bills.
Right.
And I wasn't in a great place financially. I did have some room on some credit cards and stuff and things. And I sat down with my wife at the time and I said, we worked it out. We said, look, this is really important and I can do it. So I put this thing together, and this is actually a magazine that was published with what we did. And you can see me on the right there. I'm in the orange shorts. I'm sort of blocked by the young man in front of me named Jonathan. I had 3 14-year-old kids. I had a guy from Palestine. I had one from South Africa. I had a Canadian. I had somebody from Switzerland. I had this team of just ragtag people that we brought together and had to get them into a functioning group. And we ran every step of 2,000 miles, about 100 miles a day, doing public relation events across Europe. And the cool part was, this tied together all the adventure experience I'd had, but it also tied together a great purpose behind it. That I wasn't just out seeking adventure and thrill and an adrenaline rush for me. It was actually making a difference to all those people in those countries that wanted to believe what they wanted to believe. And I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be picking up a torch. You can go ahead and flip through some of the next slides on that. Here's part of it. We usually ran one at a time, but a lot of times we come into a town, we'd run as a team. That's actually on the border of Belgium and France. I'm taking my turn with the torch. I never thought I would be someone picking up a torch and defending religious freedom for thousands of people in 17 countries, which I did for 7 years. And those are some of the greatest, like I said, we ran every step. That's a young man, 14 years old, out of Canada named Jonathan. We're running practically through a construction site then. I think the next one is we're meeting a mayor of a town. Now this is coming into it. But we would stop and we would meet with officials and we would get them to sign on with our proclamation to defend the religious freedom of others. And it was actually wound up being a very, very successful activity. One of the other interesting things was getting volunteers, the local volunteers, to become active with us. And they were very reluctant because they were in the countries being suppressed. But there was this amazing thing when they picked up that torch and started running with it. I swear to God, they had an out-of-body experience. And they were like, I'm doing something. And we had people, we had 2 guys in Holland that joined us for the entire run. We were like the Pied Pipers that took everybody's children away. We would have people join us for 3, 4, 5, 10 days at a time. And they started just by picking up the torch and running, 2 blocks in their city, and then they didn't want to give it back because they were actually making a difference to everybody. And it was just really an incredible experience to watch how you could bring life into somebody.
Sure about the 2 teenage girls that their parents called you after?
Yeah, at the end of this, I had 2 14-year-old girls, one from Mexico, one from Switzerland, and both their parents called me at the end, and they said, I don't know what you did to my daughters. And I was like, I didn't do anything to your daughters. They said they get up on time, fix their breakfast, make their bed, they get to school on time, they come home, and both of them, I said, I just treated them like adults. And I quite honestly, when I was 14, nobody gave me a break. I just said, you're 14. I don't give a rip if you're a 14 or you're 40. We're in this together, and you got the same responsibility of everybody else. And they rose to the occasion. They were treated as an adult, and what happened? You saw the person just blossom into responsibility, with what they had to do. Yeah. This picture I want to share with you. In 1984, I hitchhiked across Europe for about 6 weeks after the Olympics. I worked for the Olympic Committee in '84, and I met a family. An older couple picked me up. And we were talking about this. How many languages do I speak?
Yeah, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 2 languages. I speak English, and I speak English as a second language. Okay? So when I went over, I'd hitchhiked through Norway, and so I sort of got a feel for it. So I went over in '84. I took some pictures of me working for the Olympics. And what I realized, you don't have to know the words to communicate with someone. So typically what would happen is most of the countries I was in, they would speak German. So they'd pick me up, and I look relatively German. I'm blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and I'm standing on the edge of the road. There's some other things I learned on that, but they'd pick me up, and they'd start speaking German to me, and I'd say, Nein, sprechen Deutsch, sprechen English. And you see the person roll their head, and they go, oh, God, I picked up a yank. And I'd let a couple minutes go by, and then I would tap them on the shoulder and go, sprechen Deutsch, auf Wiedersehen, Dankeschön, ein Bier, which means... Goodbye, thank you, 1 beer, please. And they would usually laugh. And then I would pull my pictures out and start showing them pictures of the Olympics. Me in my uniform, I got my picture taken with Mary Lou Retton. I had my picture taken with all these gold medal winners and stuff. I'm at the closing ceremonies and all that. Oh, and the Olympics were just over. So the '84 Olympics were extremely successful.
Yeah.
And so I had all these people that would take me up into the mountains for this view and this lunch and these incredible stories that happened. But I had this couple that picked me up in Switzerland, and they took me to a train station, and they said they called their son, and I'm waiting, and I said the son shows up, and he'd traveled through the U.S. He was my age. He traveled through the U.S. for a couple of months. He spoke broken English, and we just had this great conversation, and I stayed at their house that night. They took me to a hitchhiking place beyond to get out of town the next day. And when I got back to the U.S., I sent them this pictorial book of the U.S. and stayed in touch with them. This is 14 years later. This is their family. They came and ran with us in Switzerland. And what's amazing to me is I make these contacts. We just stay in touch because we like each other, and it's the nice thing to do. And you wind up with these lifelong friendships. And actually, Michael wound up flying for Swiss Air, came into Long Beach a bunch of times, and we got together in Long Beach and came up and had dinner at my house, and just these incredible friendships you have by standing on the side of the road with my thumb out, and then having some pictures and be able to get in communication with each other. So I think the next picture is the team running into Frankfurt. This was after 2,000 miles, 6 weeks on the road. That's where running into Frankfurt. Tremendous success that year. We continued these activities for 7 years, but we changed them from running from city to city to cycling from city to city because it just beat the crap out of us and we had to go slow. So that's how I was able to cycle from St. Petersburg to Oslo. Was that in 2002 we were doing the run from St. Petersburg, Oslo, then down to Paris, and I couldn't stay for the whole trip, but I did the advanced trip. So I cycled. Cycling in Russia is a crazy experience. But I want to share one story with you that I think really brings things home. This is in Finland, and I'd been up at that point for 43 or 44 hours. But I put you can see the torch on the front of my bike there, that we had a stand for it. I had cycled almost 100K that day, and I'm eating an ice cream cone in front of an ice cream cone thing. I just said, let's get a picture here. So anyway, I'm in, let me think what my, oh yeah, so I'm in, we're in St. Petersburg, and we have to cycle we have to cycle to the Finnish border. Now, one of the things in Russia, they're not used to bicycles on the road when the cars aren't. So the idea that they're going to give way to you is a new concept to them, okay? So you're really taking your life in your hands. The other thing is St. Petersburg, because it's on the edge of the Baltic, the design of the city has all these curved roads around it. So when you're trying to get out of the city, it's like trying to get out of this curved labyrinth. You keep trying to move northeast or northwest, but you have to keep going southwest in the process and then come back. So we're literally trying to get out of town, and we ride up to this little town called Vigor. And Vigor is about 60 or 80 miles northwest of St. Petersburg. And once we got out of St. Petersburg, it was a pretty straight ride, and it was 90 degrees, gorgeous day. We're coming into Vigor, and it is just an armpit of a Russian town. It's got these large apartment complexes that the concrete's falling off of because Russia didn't know how to, they were building them too fast and concretes are falling off. There's no shoulder on the road. We're constantly getting pushed off on the road. Cars coming really close to us. We're supposed to meet some person at the train station, and we come into the Vigor train station, and it's this huge Gothic train station with these giant sort of Grecian pillars. But you can imagine the Russian winters and the wind blowing through there would just be crazy. So what the Russians did is in the Soviet time, they took half-inch steel plates and with these big straps, strapped these straps around the pillars and put these half-inch steel plates between the pillars and this little door down in the train station. Now, I'm sure the steel kept the wind out, but I'm sure it's like being in an ice box when you're inside that. But it was the ugliest piece of architecture I had seen. Then I come into the parking lot of the train station, and it's these huge these big stones that are about 2.5 feet across, and they have these deep ridges in them. So I'm literally taking the front tire of my bike, popping from stone to stone to make sure I don't get down in it and bend a rim on it or something. And I go over, and there's this old Russian lady with a bike rack on her car. So we knew that she'd come up to get our bikes. And so I was riding with two other guys, a gentleman who's a great friend of mine named Larry Burns, and then this young man named Jesse. And Jesse was 18. It was his first trip out of the country. And he was everything was new. Oh, hey, Lance, what about this? What about this? So we go over, we put our bike racks on the car, and there's this white tent across the parking lot. And they're selling beer. And I go, Larry, you want a beer? He goes, absolutely. So we walk over, and Jesse goes, we're getting beer? We're getting beer? I thought we were on a human rights ride. I said, Jesse, we're on a human rights ride. Beer is a human right. Understand that, okay? All right, so we're not on a religious, ride. We're on a human rights ride. So we go in this translucent white tent. We sit down in these chairs that are these flimsy plastic chairs. I'm almost concerned I'm going to fall through. We order 3 beers. The plastic cups are so thin that when I'm trying to pick them up, I'm concerned I'm going to spill all the beer out of them. And there's this song, this Russian song playing on the radio that's just this squawky Russian thing. And I'm thinking, I am so far away from anything that I'm connected to. I am off the crossroads. There is nothing I have in common with anybody here. And the song on the radio ends, and there's about a 2-second silence. And the next song that starts is the guitar intro to Hotel California. And I hear that and I go, oh my God, Larry, it's Hotel California. And Larry looks up and he goes, I think we won the war. But what was amazing to me is that no matter where you are, it's like Western influence in music can transcend so many cultures. And here I am in a place that I think I have nothing in common with. Like absolutely a complete stranger in a strange land. And they're playing a song that I'm completely familiar with and everybody relates to.
Well, in tying it up, one of the things in my deep dive on the old Lance Miller was leave it better. So if you want to like just share your idea of leave it better with the audience.
Well, I don't know. I think we all go through life and we have to leave it to the next generation, and we need to leave a better condition than we had. And really, whether it's in a company I'm turning around or a client I'm working with or walking to the airport, did I leave it a little bit better than I found it? And, there's a lot of times I'm walking through my neighborhood every morning. I take a walk up to the fire road and back, and I don't say this because I'm going, look how good I am. I go, people dump their bottles and stuff in the curb. I just pick them up and throw them away. Just leave the world a little better than you found it. And if we all did that, we'd have a great world to live in.
Yeah. So one of the things that I believe as a member of the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles, there are so many unique individuals that are members of this club. And Lance is just one example of the diversity and the experience of this club. And so anybody that's either tuning in today or a guest here at the club, I encourage you to tell other members about this, other friends, other people about this. This is a great opportunity to come here and really experience just great fellowship. And so with that being said, Lance, thank you for your experience today. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for tuning in today that are out in the
Did you want to? I
digital world.
don't know if you have any questions or how we're doing, but we got a couple. So I usually run the mic, so therefore I know.
One question over there. Uh-oh.
It's great. It was great. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
I actually have 3 questions.
1, 84 Olympics, did you get to see the basketball team?
I did not see the basketball team. I was at USC. I saw almost all the swimming and track and field.
Number 2, when you were running for religious rights, do you still have those orange shorts?
No, I don't.
Great. But number 3, that's a lot of adventure in your life. If there's a young adventurer just starting out, what advice would you give them if they wanted to live a life of adventure like yours?
Well, first of all, and I have to say, there were a number of things we cut out just to keep it in here. But what I would tell them is stay true to your heart and, follow that versus doing what you're supposed to do. The supposed to do is a trap from my standpoint, and you're not going to live a full life if you're trying to live your life making other people happy.
Thank you.
Lance, I don't know what year you did your National Geographic Common Lake.
Yeah,
Is it working? I don't think it's working.
yeah, I did that in '78, just so you know.
78. Yeah, Ralph White and Emery Christoph, both members of this club, did an article for Geographic all about the Loch Ness Monster.
Okay.
It's, but I think it was since then. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So he said a couple of guys from the Adventures Club did an article for the National Geographic in the Loch Ness Monster. We got George in the back there.
I'm with Ken. We need to get those shorts up on display here at the club. But you only touched on Singapore very lightly. I was just curious, how did you like Singapore, and would you return again?
I did like Singapore. Singapore is a great example, and I will just say, I consider myself a student of like national policy on how do you keep a free people and how do you keep an economic system that's actually fair, and you don't allow almost every economic system goes into massive control or control of the masses with an oligarchy controlling it, and also the huge welfare state that gets wind up developed where people want to be compensated for doing nothing, and that's a great way to kill something. Singapore is a great example from my standpoint of putting a very workable system together, long-term planning with it across the board. I was very impressed with what they had there. It was very hot and humid. That's the one thing I didn't like about it. It was sticky and hot the entire time I was there. But as far as long-term planning and what seems to be a very stable, sane approach to running a society, I was very impressed with what they had. So.
Thank you very much for tuning in tonight.